Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Media Week here at TMP. We've got a lot of great sessions lined up for you this week, covering various topics of what B2B marketers need to know about media today. To find out more about all of these sessions across the week, please head over to the marketing practice, where they'll be on demand after this week. But for today's session, what works where? We're joined by Matt Egan from Foundry. Matt is an executive leader with more than 2 decades of experience leading successful editorial teams across the globe. Matt leads and supports Foundry's world-class team of journalists and is responsible for audience development, data, content, analytics, and video and content strategy for the world's most popular B2B and B2C technology publications. And in today's session, we're going to be discussing how the B2B tech buying journey is evolving. Matt's going to be sharing insights from Foundry's latest research report on how these trends are reshaping decision-making, how they're adapting as a B2B publisher, and how marketers can better align their media and content strategy to the buyer's needs. But before I pass over to Matt, if you've got any questions throughout the session, please feel free to drop them into the chat and we will answer them as we go along or endeavor to get back to you. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Matt. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. Okay, let me just start to seamlessly share my slides. Just check that you can see that okay.
All coming through okay. Brilliant.
Wonderful. Okay, so thanks. Really appreciate the opportunity. And I want to talk today about some of the things that we at Foundry have learned in our 60 or so years of running global media brands, and specifically focusing in on how we continue to attract and engage IT buyers and how we can use that engagement to help our customers to market to those buyers. So to introduce Foundry briefly, I'm not here to market myself, but we have 4 consumer and 5 B2B global brands targeting only the IT and technology sectors. So today I'm going to focus principally on our B2B brands, which address the IT buyer personas within the wider IT buying team. But a lot of what I'm going to share about supporting buyers through the purchase process is entirely relevant to consumer brands and purchasing too, and it's definitely relevant to kind of all B2B spaces. So first, what I want to do is dive into what's actually happening in the technology buying process landscape. So what I'm sharing today comes from 2 of our major surveys. It comes from regularly surveying our global audience of IT buyers. It also comes from our experience of working with IT vendor customers. So 2 specific studies, the role and influence of the technology decision maker and the state of the CIO report. And the CIO, for those who don't know, is the most senior IT decision maker in any organization. And the first thing to say is that for IT in particular, and for B2B in general, the purchase process is complicated. Technology budgets are increasing, buyers are under pressure to get more bang for their buck, and the purchase process is getting more and more complex. Why is that? Well, there are more people involved. The mix of titles higher up in the buying team is changing. New titles are becoming more involved as a variety of technologies are being presented by the business and explored by IT, which is ultimately leading to purchase decisions stalling. But also, products and solutions are becoming more complex as technology drives change, AI being the obvious example here. So buyers are responding by conducting more thorough research, turning to a variety of information sources, and leaning on tech vendors for their product knowledge. That makes it both more complicated to market IT products to buyers, but it also creates a lot more opportunity to influence and educate those buyers and drive those purchases. Some of that complexity is reflected in the drive to identify the need and make the purchase. Technology is changing the world rapidly. B2B buyers have problems to solve, but it's not often for them about replacing product X with product Y. Actually, they're often thinking up kind of brand new solutions. So customer demand, competitor threats, legislative change means that they're trying to understand what they need and then how to fulfill that need before they even get into making a purchase decision. So there's real opportunity from the marketing side to educate and support those processes. That also means that it's a long process. Like the IT buying process, and this is mapped to other B2B sectors, is more than 6 months on average. And when you consider that most of the personas involved in these purchase projects are engaged in and are influencing multiple potential purchase processes, you can understand that these people are always somewhere in the purchase process for something. So the opportunity is always on. And this is a thing we'll come back to again and again. That means you need to be present to these people the whole time. And there's a lot of them. As things become more complex, as dollars become tighter in some cases as well, there are more people involved in the process. You want to influence all of these people. You cannot afford to influence none of them. So you've got to be always on, and you've got to be thinking about a wide variety of purchase personas. I share this slide because it is so complex to understand that I think it perfectly illustrates the challenge and the opportunity. Business people as well as technology specialists are represented here. The influence of each persona waxes and wanes through the process. And again, you need to influence and educate these people with specific useful messaging and information at all parts of the process, but especially where they are the most influential. So the technology process is complex. Hey, that's all you need to do, right? Easy as that. No, it's complex, but nothing is perfect. And there's a huge amount of opportunity within that complexity to make your organization part of the conversation and to drive influence. So let's take the advantage of that opportunity, right? Let's switch it up and look at that opportunity. What is it that tech buyers are telling us all day, every day when we're speaking to them through our publications and through our journalism that they need in order to identify the right products and critically to drive through to purchase through that 6-month process? IT buyers tell us in general and all the time that the system as it currently stands doesn't always work for them. There's never been more content available. I think we can all think about this in our own lives, right? Finding content is not an issue. Finding useful insight from within the noise is tough. And one of the things that IT buyers tell us the whole time is that poor quality and irrelevant information is worse than no information. And I have to say that the trend is not positive in that regard. Bear in mind that this stat relates to assets that have been downloaded. So this is 48% of potential buyers who have signed up for a download, who will be considered a qualified lead, are telling us that they're left with a negative impression based on the information that they've read. And if you look to the right-hand side here, it is because the information was not helpful. It wasn't helpful to their specific needs. So one of the key insights here is, yeah, you've got to be always on. You've got to be present to these people. But you also have to make sure you're driving some level of useful information to them, right? It is not just good enough to get them to engage. You have to get them to engage with something that is helping them. You need to be present through all the stages, providing useful information in a format that not only helps the technical people, but helps them to educate the non-technical people who are part of this process. So it's complex. It is a challenge, but it's an opportunity. And if you take it all together, if you recall my previous overly complicated slide, which showed personas and stages of the process, you can then map all of the personas involved in the purchase process to where they have the most influence. And here we can see the content need at each stage of the process. So we can move from a problem, right? A bewildering big problem. How the heck do we influence all these people? It becomes a thing to do. Content can be relevant to multiple personas in multiple stages. You just need something relevant and useful for some personas at some stages. And the key thing again is to always be present to all of these people and to make sure that the information you are providing is unique and useful. So just to wrap the challenge and the opportunity before we moved on to the doing of it, right? This is a complex thing, but marketing content, the principles have never changed. You've got to understand to whom you're marketing, you've got to understand what they need and when, and provide content assets that map to those needs and fulfill those needs. Easy for me to say. So let's try to make that more practical when we're marketing IT solutions to IT buyers. What are we actually talking about here in 2025 when we talk about providing content and insights to IT buyers throughout the purchasing process? So I'm going to speak about the way that we at Foundry might work with one of our tier 1 customers, and that is about surrounding the buyer in all channels. It's understanding content consumption and marketing channels as well as they map to buyer need, same as it ever was. the same things that we've talked about many times. It's ads, it's leads, it's white papers, it's events, but it's also thinking about content across all channels. Yes, publications, but social channels, audiovisual content, podcasts, newsletters. And as with all engagement with content, which is my actual job, running our publications, you have to be constantly reaching out to engage users on all relevant discovery channels, so social, digital, online channels, in order that when these people are in market for more in-depth, low funnel information, it's you that they go to. So this concept of being always on and surrounding the buyer, and then them activating themselves and going to you when they need deeper information. So I am a content guy. But I am here to tell you that even when marketing complex B2B solutions, advertising is really important, is a key part of the process. Remember how many technical and non-technical people you have to influence. And here's the key thing. If they haven't heard of you, if you're not a credible voice in the space, you're unlikely to be in the conversation, even if you're introduced by a technical person as a good solution to the problem. So there's a reason why all the tech bros advertise at the Super Bowl, right? Yeah, massive ego is part of it, but the other part of it is they know that your brand has to be familiar to non-technical decision makers in order to avoid some disruption in the purchase process when your name is introduced to that process. And as well as a content guy, I'm an editorial guy. I'm a journalist, but we have to acknowledge that journalists don't hold the monopoly on good ideas, right? When useful, relevant, and correctly labeled, buyers do rely on vendor content. They want and ask for information for potential suppliers, and they judge potential vendors based on the vendor content that they see in front of them. So it's important to make sure that's part of the mix. In fact, and this relates to the advertising point that I made a couple of slides earlier, IT buyers tell us that vendors need to be seen to be a credible and helpful voice to be taken seriously as a supplier by line of business purchase influencers. So again, what does that mean? It means that your technical people might be wowed by what the thing can do, but in order to drive a sale through, you need to be able to influence non-technical people who are signing off on these decisions. And that is a combination of all types of content, but it definitely includes advertising and vendor content. Here's another complicated slide. I think this is my final really complicated slide. But what it tells us is that all channels and all voices are important and influential through the purchase process, but three in particular. IT buyers want to hear from independent journalists, so reporting and analysis that they can trust. They do want to hear from their IT buyer peers. It's amazing the value of a personal recommendation from someone that is trusted within industry. And they want to hear from vendors. So to reach them, you need to engage with potential buyers through those trusted independent channels. I would say this, but it is those branded events, publications, analysts, and also the places where buyers go for information, which includes vendors. And they're looking for different things. So from publications like the ones that I work with, they're looking for credible and independent information made simple. From vendor sites, they're looking for clear and accessible information. And just as an aside, as an anecdote, like within Foundry, allied to our CIO brand, we have a video series called Demo, which is very simple. We invite software vendors to come on our video show and demo their wares. It is a small audience because it's only of interest to people who are interested in purchasing those types of products, but it's a massive driver of sales for those vendors because you would not believe the number of vendors who expect customers to call them or chat with a bot to get simple, what does it do, how does it work information. Buyers want to find that stuff easily, on demand, when they're looking for it, and they resent having to reach out and find that kind of information. So it's a really important learning for vendors that like giving the always on demand opportunity for users to understand what your product does is such an important part of this whole mix. And what we hear from IT buyers is they're totally up for downloading technical niche vendor information to do that. If you make it useful, if you make it credible and informational, you don't need to be selling the whole time. An important note is that this slide is about pieces of content and rather than number of information sources. But again, like what it tells us is that those IT buyers are happy to do the work of investing in the information, but they want the information to be relevant and credible, and they want it to be always there for them when they need to find it. Even for B2B, maybe especially for B2B in some ways, social media channels are extremely important. Context and relevancy is critical. Brand safety is a factor, of course it is. And if you elicit a response, you need to be responsive in return. But as a discovery channel, as a place to attract and engage new users, social remains unsurpassed. Just don't think of it as driving people anywhere, right? I lose my mind when people talk about using social channels to drive to websites, right? Any more than, I'm old enough to remember when people used to talk about using websites to drive people to buy print magazines, right? It's nonsense. It doesn't happen. Social channels are great places to engage with buyers, right? If you can get them to subscribe to your channels through that content, brilliant. That's the end goal. Again, you've engaged with them, you've re-engaged with them, and when they want to be activated, they know to come to you. That's the goal. It's not about shifting people from platform to platform. And clearly, video is a hugely important format and medium within that ecosystem. Again, it's about being appropriate, relevant, and contextual. Fix the message to the medium. So people do like to see as much as they like to read, but they need both, and they need to be contextual. And I will draw your attention to the demographic numbers here, right? Like, I think there's a perception sometimes that there's a massive age divide in terms of content consumption. I got to tell you, in a space as niche as B2B buying, IT buying, we don't see that at all, honestly. So we split audiovisual content into two buckets, right? This is internal language for us, right? But I think it helps to explain some of our learnings here. There's what we call webcast and there's podcast. Webcast is activation, podcast is always on. It's funny because webcast is one of those formats like podcasts, like email newsletters, that at various points we've been told they're dead, and yet they're supremely important. Don't sleep on the webcast. If you've got unique insights to share, specifically research that is helpful in a buying process, the webcast is actually a growing medium, and buyers will really happily sign up to get those unique insights. It's like a visual white paper. Again, if it's relevant and contextual and useful, like, we see great demand there. Podcasts are the other side of that. It's about getting people to follow you and re-engage with you continually. It's more discursive. That's where people might get the peer insights. But again, both extremely valuable and important. If the goal is to share those peer insights, experience, and discussion, to build followership and engagement, to be present and credible, podcast and email newsletters, that's where it's at. It's all about fitting the information source and the channel to the day, to the timeline of the end user. IT buyers are very busy people. They want to be able to find this information wherever they need it, always on. So with all content strategy, it's about being always on in your engagement, but having the right content for activation so that you're a credible source of information all the time, and the right source of information when it counts the most. This can be made to sound very complex, but I think, if we focus on those principles, that's definitely what our learnings have been over quite some time now, Matt. So I've spoken for a long time. I think people would like to hear a different voice, and I think it should be your voice.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt, for running through that. There's some great insights there. Lots to kind of unpack. I did have a couple of questions really for you. So we're seeing a lot of shifts, especially in kind of the world of AI. How are you seeing as a publisher really kind of how that's affecting the B2B tech buyers, how they're consuming content, how they're making decisions? Are you seeing any kind of shifts in that?
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, it's not unique to B2B and it's not unique to tech. And I think we can all think about our own content consumption and draw some insights from this. I think the way I would address it is that there's been a big shift very recently, actually, but certainly over the past sort of 2 to 3 years. Lots of reasons for it. But it's almost as profound, if not in some ways more profound, than that initial shift from print to online, from physical to digital. And the way I might describe that is that we've moved from a kind of era of search, from an era where people proactively interrogate fixed information on the internet to find insights and content to the period of continual content discovery. So I kind of alluded to it just before, but content discovery is now sort of fitting into the shape of our day versus push or appointment to view. So, again, without sounding like a dinosaur, we don't buy newspapers, we don't wait in to watch the evening news. What we have now is pockets of the day or the week in which we're in different types of consumption mode. So, like I was mentioning previously, podcasts are hugely valuable because I personally listen to podcasts when I'm exercising, but also when I'm commuting, sometimes when I'm just chilling out. But like they're all different parts of my kind of my day. I start the day with more than I care to remember email newsletters, right? And the ones that I subscribe to are the ones that give me unique insight, but also they're kind of interesting and fun, right? I look forward to opening them. And then we scroll, right? And so that discovery approach, that idea of being always on, being always present, and there when the user needs me, but constantly kind of reaching out to nudge them to halt their scroll by giving them something that's interesting, and something that they should care about is very different to, even well, certainly 5 years ago when, most content discovery was coming through somebody literally typing a query into a search bar somewhere. So that has changed a lot because what it means is the principles remain the same, right? You have to provide something that's unique and insightful, and you have to do it consistently to get those people to come back to you when they're looking to activate and find the most important pieces of information. But I think the channels have changed and actually are changing really rapidly.
Brilliant. No. Thanks, Matt. One thing that we're also seeing, and you've run through it, is the B2B buying committees are always constantly growing. You're saying kind of about having an always-on approach as well. So there's a lot more now that marketers need to do. So just thinking, have you got any advice, kind of how marketers really should rethink kind of content and media strategy to be able to influence multiple decision makers at a time? Because the job of a B2B marketer is definitely getting harder, trying to do a lot more with quite a lot less.
Yeah, I completely accept that actually, and I think it's interesting because I think it was quite a stable thing for quite some time. I speak to people in the marketing side who have not always done the same things, but they've always known a world where it's search and social, and it's paid and it's owned and earned, and we forget a little bit that in itself was a very different like turn of the wheel from what happened previously. And what has never changed is the first principles. Be useful, give insights that help purchasing decisions, be discoverable, always on, and there for when people need you. I think what the expansion of the buying team does is it means you have to drill more into that, right? Like in my complicated slides, it is possible to bamboozle people with this stuff, right? And I dare say, we're not always above doing that. But the reality is, if what you're doing is useful for the people who are looking to purchase the type of solution you've got, what you need to do is give those people useful insights. So it is about understanding who your buying team is, which of them you can and should reach and influence, which of them you can't afford not to reach and influence. Understand what they need, what you can give them that only you can give them, and produce that kind of thing usefully. I think where things go wrong sometimes is making that more complex than it needs to be. It's that thing of if you're not lying, just make sure you tell the truth kind of thing. And I also think it's about understanding the different kind of needs, and the different opportunities around different channels. So from a media perspective, you do have to be there, right? You have to be known to these people. But you also, the end goal, from a content perspective should be not, as we discussed in one of the earlier slides, it's not just to get the lead from getting someone to download an asset. It's to actually drive value to that end user. That's what's going to help you succeed as a marketer.
That makes absolute sense, and that comes across all activity, including any upfront kind of advertising through to content as well. I did also have a question really around what kind of common mistakes are you seeing that other vendors making? And like, is there anything that they can kind of keep in mind to kind of fix them?
Yeah, I think, and again, it comes back to the previous answer that, in every profession, there are people who are great and there are people who are just good, right? And sometimes what I see from the marketing side, the people who are just good understand how to fulfill tactical goals. So, we're able to fill the pipeline, but if it doesn't drive to sales, it's not helping us kind of thing. We're able at each stage of the process to hit our KPIs, but somehow we're not driving sales at the end of it. And irrelevance is the thing. Irrelevance is the killer. We're increasingly trying to reach and influence people whose time is increasingly precious. Um, and although the buying teams get bigger, like organizations are not themselves getting bigger in terms of employees, so you're tending to try and influence the same person multiple times. So you have to help those decision makers solve their problems, even if that means not always showing your best self, right? It is about giving relevant and contextual information. So I think the biggest mistakes are, I think when we see advertising or marketing dressed up in the clothes as useful content, right? Like as discussed, there is nothing wrong with advertising or marketing. It works. But if you're going to do that overtly, make sure it is labeled as what it is. You're not pretending to give someone helpful content. I think lack of localization is a big issue. Right, I work for an organization that's headquartered in the US. I will tell you now, it's pretty frustrating if you're a UK EMEA person and you're asked to use US content assets. But let me tell you, my colleagues in APAC go absolutely wild about that, and it's less than useful, right? It's negative if you have something that's clearly not properly localized, and if you want to increase or accelerate that, like poorly done personalization or curation is so much worse than not doing it, kind of thing. I think one thing that comes up often and is difficult, I think, for marketers sometimes is we often get customers coming to us and they really want to kind of optimize around a specific set of terms that, frankly, is their own internal marketing language, right? It's branding language that isn't used externally. And at that point, you've got two options, right? You can either spend the time and the effort to push that language out to get it to be known within your end user community, or you have to be a little bit humble and tell the story in the words that the users actually use. Which, from our perspective, that's something we can help with both ways, right? We'd much rather do it the organic way because we talk to IT buyers all the day and we know what they're actually saying. But yeah, ultimately, I think it comes down to being relevant and useful. Buyers do not mind being sold to, but they need to know what the thing is in context, and they're really looking for usefulness because the big thing here is trust. It's hard to earn and it's easy to lose. And if you lose it, you're actually hurting your marketing efforts.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. I think we've got time for one more question. So just to finish up, what's one underappreciated shift in B2B buying behavior that marketers should really focus on throughout 2025? It's a tricky one to end up.
Yeah, it is. I think it's kind of a wrap of what we said above. So let me try and put it into one kind of insight. The expanding size of the buying team, the length of the purchase process, and the sheer volume of decisions being made means that the need for content is constant, right? But that doesn't mean you should flood the channels or the market with content. If you want your customer to come to you, if you want them to think of you as a viable supplier when they are in market, you need them to know that you are there all the time. And that means having content that is relevant, contextual, and helpful, that is available on the right channels the whole time. It doesn't mean either constantly kind of pushing at people like to remarket to them, and it definitely doesn't mean expecting people to be grateful for kind of unuseful and unhelpful content. So it is that thing of you need to be present the whole time on all the right relevant channels, but you've got to do it in a way that is useful to the end user.
Brilliant. Nicely summarized. Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate you running through the report and answering some of those questions. So thank you.
Thank you.
And to thank you for everyone else for joining. We've still got some great sessions lined up still tomorrow, and all sessions were going to be on demand on the Marketing Practice website. So feel free to check them out. So thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your week. Cheers, Matt.